Thank you for your time to join in my online session. I got really excited right now. And yeah, before starting, I really would love to thank Berkcan Hocam and his team for his really nice guidance in organizing this session. Yeah, tonight I'm going to talk about inclusivity in ELT classrooms, embracing diversity and promoting accessibility of English for all students, and my focus will be mostly on students with disabilities in the Turkey's context in ELT classrooms. So yeah, I'm Çiğdem. I did my BA, MA, and PhD in TESOL in Turkey and United States, and I taught English as a foreign language in Salzburg, Austria, and I worked as an TESOL instructor in various, higher education institutions in Turkey and for a short time, Tatarstan, Kazan. And I presented in various conferences, and I keep publishing in peer-reviewed international journals. So my interest in inclusivity, in inclusive education, actually started with various stages during my PhD education in the United States. During my education, I noticed that I have a classmate who was deaf and who was also doing PhD like me, and then I started questioning myself. So how does it happen? In Turkey, I've never seen a deaf, classmate in a classroom with me, in the same classroom with me, in learning especially English, right? And then I got aware that yeah, students with disabilities, individuals with disabilities can also learn English like me. And then I accepted the situation, and then I did research on this topic, and I wrote my PhD dissertation on this topic, and I started to do research on how deaf students actually learn English as a foreign language and how education policies make this possible for these students. And I found really depth of research on this, and I found various barriers on this topic in Turkey and in various countries, and then I disseminated what I found in my dissertation, and now I'm on the advocating stage. That's why I'm conducting this online session with you to share my knowledge with you actually. So yeah, in this presentation, you're gonna find answers to these questions. So what is inclusive education? What is inclusive English language education? What does the case of Turkey reveal about inclusive ELT education? What do ELT teachers in Turkey say about inclusive ELT education? I'm gonna share some data, the findings with you. How can we achieve ELT education for all students in Turkey? And during the presentation, you are gonna hear about these concepts like inclusion, equity and equality, disability and differently abled students, disableism and ableism, medical model and social model of disabilities based on disability studies, person first and identity first languages, and forms of capital by Bourdieu, Linguistic Human Rights and Figured Worlds by Holland et al. So we are gonna also learn about these concepts during the presentation. So what is inclusion? So as you see in this picture, inclusion is something that giving opportunities to each member in a society to be included, to be fully included in the community, in a community, right? It's not integration, it's not segregation, it's not exclusion, definitely not assimilation, but respecting the individual needs and accepting these individuals in a society. This is actually inclusion. Inclusion creates a culture of belonging. So there are different various discourses used to define inclusion. And in this presentation, I'm gonna focus mostly on the rights and ethics discourse to define inclusion. In that, inclusion is defined for commitments, social justice, and equity, and inclusion helps prevent segregation of students from various backgrounds, especially students with disabilities. So yeah, the rights and ethics-based discourse is the framework that I based on to define inclusion in this session. There are various discourses used to define inclusion, like efficacy discourse, political discourse, pragmatic discourse, which is realization the benefits of inclusion education, policy making and implementation, So you can also just look for pragmatic discourse, for example, to analyze education policies, to be able to understand inclusive education, how inclusive education is referred in education policies. So you can use these discourses in your research, yeah, later, actually. What is inclusive education? So inclusive education is a framework based on Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it actually all started with Salamanca Statement in 1994, when member countries, European member countries, including Turkey, signed a statement, and they said that in education we should accommodate, provide accommodation for all students, and this statement provide guidelines for national level policies to take, inclusive actions in education. And the statement also discusses concepts of universal design and brings new thinking to special education with, the concept of inclusion, and focus on policy and organization, school factors, recruitment and training of education personnel, external support services, priority areas, community perspectives, resources and requirements. So the countries actually, when they try to apply inclusive education in their education policies or in the field, they mostly based their decisions on the Salamanca Statement, which is also aligning with UNESCO's 4A framework, that is access, availability, acceptability, and adaptability, providing all this 4A framework in education. And also Salamanca Statement is aligning with United Nations SDG 4, which is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all students. So national policies of countries, including Turkey, are mostly based on these frameworks to be able to apply inclusive education and including all students in education. So inclusive education is actually to achieve equity in education. That means to be able to respond to individual needs of each student in education. And the ultimate goal of inclusive education is to provide social justice for all, not only in society, but also in education, in the field of education. So inclusive education is not only for students with disabilities, but for all students. But in this session, I'm going to focus mostly on students with disabilities, right? And inclusive education is not an endpoint or even a particular destination. It's an ongoing process that we as educators should be aware of and should be able to apply in each part of sessions in our teaching processes. So how then, as the specific topic of this session is more on inclusive ELT education. So let's talk about how inclusive, how English provides inclusivity and contributes to social justice. When I asked this question, and I got responses from prospective ELT teachers and ELT teachers that English provides social justice because English provides us, with different resources available in the global world, such as, education, scientific research, global communities, job opportunities. It helps us, delve into diverse cultures, learn about diverse, cultures and languages. It helps us develop our careers. So that's why I got responses that English, helps contributes to social justice. And this is right, as Bourdieu also states that English as a global language, English in the global world, actually can help us to accumulate various forms of capital, like linguistic capital, cultural capital, social, economic, and symbolic capital, which are really, resources that English provides us. So as individuals with abilities can access these sources, what about students with disabilities then? So if English is a tool to help us to access, sources, and what about other individuals then? Then we need to make English accessible for all individuals so that all can accumulate these forms of capital available in the global world, thanks to English as a global language. And also in the long term, learning English positively influence our habitus, right? It positively influence how we thinks, our talks, our social, environment. And when we bring, capital and habitus that English provides us, when we think about the field of education, it also influences our practices. For example, in my case, thanks to my knowledge of English, I gained economic capital, right? I gained a job, both in Turkey and in other countries. And also it changed my habitus. Now, because of my social capital, I can just communicate with other individuals, respecting their, cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, and it also in the field of education influenced my practice. That's why I'm advocating for English language education for all individuals. That's why I try to teach English to all individuals without, thinking them they are disabled or they are coming from various backgrounds. So I really give importance to teaching English to any individual coming from any backgrounds. So English is also a linguistic human rights. So we told this is a right to use one's own language or the languages of their choice. And this is a linguistic human right. I ask this concept, so mostly education policies are based on education rights framework, and linguistic human rights are rarely mentioned in these documents. But when I ask linguistic human rights to prospective ELT teachers, they also said that they have no or little knowledge of linguistic human rights, but they believe that students with disabilities have the right to learn English as a foreign language. So they couldn't define this as a linguistic human rights, but they mostly said that they have a right to learn English as a foreign language. And also, as this excerpts from data show that the prospective ELT teachers believe that learning a foreign language is a human right, is a social right, is an education right, is a right, right? So no one can put a barrier to anyone from learning, English. So it is a right of an individual. So linguistic human rights are necessary but not sufficient tools in the struggle for social justice. Yes, we can consider English as a linguistic human right, but we should also consider other components in ELT education to provide social justice, to achieve social justice for all in the field of education. So yeah, what is inclusive English language education then? I mentioned about how English helps us provide, accumulate various forms of capital and learning English from the linguistic human rights perspective. So what is inclusive English language education then? In a classroom, when we just think that the diversity in an ELT classroom, so I just got responses that in an ELT classroom, we can come across like students coming from linguistic and cultural backgrounds, various, cultural linguistic backgrounds, and freedom, types of intelligences, linguistic differences. This can comprise diversity in an ELT classroom environment, and that's right. So no ELT classroom have a clear-cut difference, right? It's a spectrum, and you may have students coming from various, backgrounds in a spectrum. So yeah, but none of the people that I asked this question, the diversity in an ELT classroom, mentioned about, disabilities. So they didn't say that disabilities, students with disabilities are part of diversity in of an ELT classroom. And this is really interesting. And we should ask this question, why? Why can't we just say disability or students with disabilities are part of diversity or in an ELT classroom? There's a question mark here. So what about disabilities then? What are disabilities? Maybe this can be because of our lack of knowledge of disabilities, or maybe education policies mostly focusing on linguistic and cultural, diversity, but not on disabilities in ELT classrooms. So I'm going to mention about disabilities. So there are disabilities that we can observe, or there are soft disabilities that we cannot observe actually. Visual disabilities, deafness, deafblindness, speech and language disabilities, orthopedic disabilities, traumatic brain injury, multiple disabilities. These are all disabilities that we can observe. However, we mostly do not see students with, for example, visual disabilities in a mainstream ELT classroom. Also, there are soft disabilities like learning disabilities. These disabilities cannot be observed, but we know that there are students, having like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dysnomia. So these are also disabilities that students may have in our ELT classrooms, and we should know about these kind of disabilities so that we can also learn about specific learning needs of the specific disabilities, so that we can create our roadmap in teaching English to these students, right? So in higher education institutions, the instructors, the lecturers mostly focus on tier 1 level practices, like universal practices, the practices that are valid for all students in all school settings. But what about tier 2 and tier 3 level practices? So tier 1 level practices can be applicable for all students in an ELT classroom. But when we come to tier 2, like targeted practices, these practices are for groups of students who need more support, or not teach tier 2 level teaching practices to prospective ELT teachers. That's why when an ELT teacher went to the field after graduating from higher education institution, and when they have a student with a disability in their classroom, they mostly do not know how to use targeted practices, or what are targeted practices that can use for that specific student. So yeah, this is something that higher education institutions should think about, and to integrate these tier 2 and tier 3 practices in their education programs actually. Yeah. So yeah, students with disabilities, I'm mentioning about this, and as ELT teachers, we should know that. So if you have a student with a disability, so this can be soft or observable disability, right? So you should know that in some way, these students have to face discrimination, right? Direct, indirect, or discrimination arising from the disability, or harassment or victimization because of their vulnerability. So as ELT teachers, we should be aware of this kind of discriminations that our students with disabilities may come across in the classroom environment. So in addition to teaching using the right strategies to teach English to these students, considering their learning needs, we should also know how to respond to this kind of discriminating practices, right? To protect those students in the classroom, in an ELT classroom environment. And also we should know as ELT teachers that diagnosis can be subjectively manipulated by racial segregation to hide racial and economic inequalities. And this scenario mostly happens in the countries like United States. But when we find a student with a disability in our classroom as ELT teachers, we shouldn't only rely on the paper that shows that that student has that kind of disability, right? We should go and ask and talk to that student to learn more about the labeled disability on the paper, because it's really subjective, mostly subjective. And in addition to relying only on a document, we should be able to communicate not only to parents, school administrators, but also to students themselves too. And social model of disability also says labeling any disability is subjective because of society's attribution to normality and abnormality. In this scenario, that's right, because education policies or the policies guide the community how they perceive disability from the perspective of social model or medical model. In the case of Turkey, for example, education policies or the laws of fundamental laws of disability mention about disabilities from the medical model, and that's why we design our education policies and education practices to be used for students with disabilities from this medical model perspective. And special education serves the interest of advantaged members of society by maintaining and rationalizing the further marginalization of those whom it claims to help. The establishment of special education creates an alternative location for the education of problematic children whose needs and demands might otherwise challenge the established order of regular schooling. So this special education and guiding students with disabilities to special education schools can be also an alternative for policymakers, for example, to escape from the challenge in quotation mark that these students bring to mainstream schools. So yeah, as ELT teachers, we should all be aware of these manipulative, practices, subjective practices. That's why we should always approach these students, the individualized education plans of the students, for example, or exemption practices of the students from ELT classes, for example, from a critical perspective, right? We should always ask why this is happening and if this is really the case. Yeah. So what does the case of Turkey reveal about inclusive ELT education then? In Turkey, based on the data at the Ministry of National Education, there are over 10 million students at the K-12 level schools, and there are almost 50,000 ELT teachers. And in K-12 mainstream schools, there are like tons of students with disabilities. But the case is for students with disabilities is that these students are mostly exempt from ELT classes, and ELT teachers, while they teach English to students in their classroom, if a student with a disability exempt from ELT classes, they just sit in the corner of the classroom and listen what teacher is teaching to other students. Yeah, I'm going to mention about this in a minute, but this is a scenario in our country, unfortunately. And the numbers in special education schools show that there are almost 60,000 students with disabilities in special education schools in Turkey, and there are only 75 ELT teachers teaching in these schools. And these ELT teachers are also mostly teaching at the schools for blind students, because ELT teachers learn at higher education institutions how to use audiovisual tools in teaching English to students, right? And they mostly do not know how to teach English to deaf students or to students, having a different disability. But with blind students, it's easy to teach them English because they use audio and they use vocal, words. So it's easier for them. That's why ELT teachers, the 75 ELT teachers, are mostly teach at the schools for blind students in our country. So these are the numbers in Turkey. So what about the policy documents then? The Constitution of the Republic of Turkey says that no one shall be deprived of the right to receive an education, right? And fundamental law of national education says that education institutions are open to all, regardless of language, race, sex, disability, and religion. In education, no privilege shall be given to any person, family, group, or class. So this is okay, right? Until now. And regulations for foreign language education says that foreign language means any language other than Turkish. And mostly the regulations focus on listening, reading, speaking, and writing in language education. And as you see, different modes of languages are ignored in the document. So when you look at from the inclusive, perspective, so just ask a question, and you can easily analyze this document from the inclusive perspective. Yeah, the other modes of languages are just not mentioned in the document. So what about the on individuals with disabilities. This law just defined disabled individual as the one who is restricted from equal and active participation in society with other individuals because of the environmental conditions and attitudes caused by physical, mental, and sensory loss at any level. So as you see, restriction, the word restriction. So the law just, look at disability from the medical model perspective. So, and the policy document, just because of the referring disability and restriction, because this also, as this is the a top document, this perspective also reflected in other regulations under this document. So obviously the document just define disability, kind of restriction, sensory loss at any level. And regulations of special education services, these regulations, as I said, are written based on the law of individuals with disabilities, and it says that students who have a hearing disability, mental disability, and or autism, sensory loss, right, with the written permission of their parents and decisions of individualized education plan committee, may be exempted from foreign language courses at any level of education. So when look at this underlined sentence, what do you think about about the sentence from the inclusive education perspective? So the Constitution says that no one can be exempted from can be exempted from education, and education is a right for all students. We should provide full access to education for all students in education. So what about foreign language education? Given that foreign language education is a compulsory, course process at the K-12 level, but there is an opportunity. I'm not going to say opportunity here, but there is something here, flexibility given to teachers and parents, and with that they may exempt these students with disabilities from foreign language classes at any level of education. So while, for example, in the case of deaf students, hearing students can learn English as a foreign language at a K-12 mainstream school, a deaf student in the same school mostly exempt from foreign language courses because of the belief that sensory loss may prevent these students from learning English, or parents often prefer or find foreign language education a burden on this student. And in the schools for deaf students, there is no English language education course. So when we look at these documents from inclusive education perspective, there are a lot to discuss and there are a lot to change, to talk about actually. So the constructing policy language hints at the social practices in a context. It's really important. So in Turkey's case, we looked at these policy documents. So even if after graduating, even if you work in Turkey or in any other countries, you should be able to deconstruct the language of the policy to be able to analyze how those policy documents refer to individuals, coming from various backgrounds. And we should all know that education is political. That's why we should always have a critical perspective while approaching or looking at a policy document or textbooks or curriculum that you are going to use actually after graduating, for example. Inclusive education is more political because the issue is not the person with a disability, but rather how normalcy is constructed in a society. So the education policies also give us hints about the society's perspective towards inclusiveness, towards disability. So that's why deconstructing the language in a policy document is really important, especially for us, for ELT teachers, in the process of creating inclusive education environment. What do ELT teachers say about inclusive ELT education then? I asked this question both to prospective ELT teachers and to ELT teachers working in the field at the K-12 public schools in Turkey. So what do ELT teachers say about inclusive ELT education? So prospective teachers say that they know how to teach. To this question, actually, they responded, I know how to teach EFL to students with disabilities. So as you see, So many of them have little or no knowledge of how to teach English as a foreign language to students with disabilities. And yeah, so having a student with a disability in my EFL classroom will increase my workload. But interestingly, even if they do not know how to teach EFL to students with disabilities, they mostly do not believe that teaching or having a student with a disability in their classroom will not increase their workload, right? And students with disabilities can learn EFL. So yeah, happily we see that they all believe that students with disabilities can learn English as a foreign language, so if appropriate conditions are provided for the students. And having a student with a disability in an EFL classroom negatively influence the classroom atmosphere. And as you see, yeah, none of them believe that this is true. So they believe that students with disability contributes to inclusiveness and variety in a classroom environment. Students with disabilities do not have the ability to learn EFL. So yeah, interestingly, as you see, they do not believe in this. They believe that students with disabilities also have the ability to learn English as a foreign language. Students with disabilities shouldn't be in mainstream EFL classrooms, and they believe that they should be in mainstream EFL classroom, right? And this really provides us how prospective ELT, EFL teachers think about inclusiveness, think that students with disabilities really contributes to inclusiveness in an EFL classroom. Teaching EFL to students with disabilities is not different from teaching students without disabilities. So there are, varieties in responses to this statement, actually. Teaching students with disabilities can be challenging for EFL teachers. Although they believe that students with disabilities have the ability to learn English, they can learn English, and they provide richness in ELT classrooms, and they believe that this teaching to these students can be challenging for EFL teachers, and this can be the result because of they do not know yet how to teach English to students with disabilities, right? So in my courses, actually at METU, I try to teach my students how to identify specific learning needs of specific, students with specific disabilities. So they first analyze learning needs of these students, and then they brainstorm and try to arrange classroom activities responding to learning needs of these students. So this is a step actually to help these prospective teachers to be able to teach students with disabilities further in their, careers at the K-12 level schools. So when I asked this statements questions to teachers, ELT teachers working at the K-12 level public schools in Turkey, so I found this. It is really difficult to teach English to students with disabilities. So as you see, while prospective teachers find it can be challenging, in teaching ELT to these students, in the field, in the reality, yes, ELT teachers find it really difficult to teach English to students with disabilities. And unfortunately, the teachers, ELT teachers working in the fields do not know how to teach, mostly do not know how to teach English to students with disabilities. And what I learned from these teachers is that they mostly take the responsibility in learning how to teach, English to these students through social media like Facebook communities. They just visit those groups on Facebook. They ask how to teach English to, for example, a blind student in their classroom, and they learn from each other, right? So I can receive any kind of help while teaching to my students with disabilities. And unfortunately, as you see, not none, but many of these teachers working in the field teaching English to students with disabilities can receive any help in teaching to students with disabilities. So it is really sad. And as I said, in mainstream schools, mostly these students are exempt from foreign language classes. And these are the teachers who have at least one student with disability in their ELT classroom. And I also asked these teachers working in the field, what kind of instructional tools, techniques do you use in teaching English to students with disabilities? And some of them said interactive book reading as assignments to do at home. I help my student with a disability to progress slowly at her own pace. I encourage her to do more. I use total physical response, coloring, mini tasks, matching activities, lots of repetition as his individualized education plan says. Lots of repetitions with visuals. And some other teachers just stated that I do not have time to use any other techniques, right? My student cannot even read and write in Turkish, so I cannot support him further. My student is exempt from English courses, so I do nothing special. So depending on actually teacher, yeah, these teachers take actions to teach English to their students with disabilities in their ELT classrooms. And difficulties that I ask these teachers they face in teaching English to students with disabilities. And these teachers just stated, my student cannot speak, hear, and write well. He has difficulty reading and writing in Turkish, so I have trouble teaching him. Students have behavioral problems. I have difficulty in classroom management. The classroom size is too big, so I do not have time to spend only on my student with a disability. My student's attention span is too short. I do not have any long-term plan for that student. She easily forgets because of her short attention span. So these are the difficulties these teachers face in teaching to their students with disabilities. So yeah. How can we achieve ELT education for all students in Turkey then? How can we achieve inclusivity in ELT in our country? So prospective ELT teachers actually gave us the responses, right? So they give us the hints that we can take actions to achieve inclusive ELT education at the K-12 level in Turkey. So as you see, they mostly, all of them almost, say that I need more training and education to teach EFL in a diverse classroom. I need more training and education to teach English to students with disabilities. So to be able to achieve inclusivity in ELT classroom, it's really important to know the barriers to inclusive, ELT education so that we can take actions. When I say we, I mean academicians, education, policymakers. So we can actually take actions, but we should know the barriers. So there are some barriers that I collected, based on the literature or based on my own experiences. So attitudinal barriers, prejudice towards disability, bullying, harassment, victimization, physical barriers like lack of ramps, lack of assistive technology in a classroom environment, inappropriate curriculum, untrained ELT teachers, inadequate funding, poor organization of the education system, lack of communication among parents, teachers, administrators, and policymakers. And I think this is the biggest barrier in creating an inclusive ELT environment. And policies, right? So learning space, accessibility, flexibility, consistency, being explicit, supportive. These are all really important components to be able to create an inclusive ELT classroom and minimizing effort for ELT teachers. So teachers shouldn't find teaching, English to students with disabilities as a overburdening process. So we need to minimize, their effort in teaching to these students. That's why we need to focus on these other fields like accessibility, flexibility, consistency, and we need to teach these teachers to be able to help them to teach, English to students with disabilities in creating an inclusive ELT environment. And these are also other suggestions that I can make to you, like a positive behavioral intervention system. This is what we are talking these days in my classes. So this is really important, action to take for, especially for behavioral students with behavioral issues. So PBIS and consistency, internal motivation, understanding one another, you know, continuum of interventions. These are really important. Flexible teaching practices. We should create, you know, opportunities for our students to express themselves in the classroom environment. We should solve problems together with our, you know, students, and searching for strengths in all learners, and mediation. These are the suggestions that I can make to you to create an inclusive ELT context. Inquiry-based approach. This is also really important. So we should let our students ask questions, and we should let them ask questions about their learning needs, right? So that they can discover their own learning needs, and they can take agency in their own learning process. This should be the ultimate goal, actually, in inclusive ELT, in creating inclusivity in ELT context, which is also which also helps minimize the effort that an ELT teacher have to pay in teaching English to students with disabilities. So if they take the agency of their own learning, things can get easier for us, right? Using technology, being authentic, you know, teamwork, integrating community, knowing the individual, instructing in varied formats, including various, you know, multimodal tools, and sharing lived experiences. These are also really important and suggested tools that you can use, to create inclusive ELT context. So the ultimate goal actually should be gradual release of responsibility framework. This is, I, as a teacher, I do, and first I do, and you help me, and then you do, and I help you, and ultimately you do, and I watch, and I mediate if you need me. So this should be the process that we should be applying in teaching students with disability. And to be able to do that, of course, the first step is to learn their learning needs, the features of the specific disability and the learning needs of those students. And of course, universal design for learning, right? So we should be sure that our classroom, ELT classroom, is inclusive, and we are paying attention to social justice. We are using differentiated, you know, instructional tools. We are proactive, and we are helping our students be proactive in their own learning process. And we are creating a community-based classroom environment by integrating, you know, parents, school administrators, policymakers, if required. And research-based classroom environment, we just guide our students, you know, do research on their own, you know, disabilities or diversity available in the classroom environment. Multimodality, and yeah, these are really important tools in creating and embracing an inclusive ELT classroom environment. So these are two examples that are prepared by my brilliant students at Middle East Technical University. So I got permission from them. So these are two posters that my students prepared. The colored one is a poster prepared for deaf students. And as you see, they used lots of visualization in this poster because they did research and learned that deaf students mostly get benefits through, you know, visualization in learning English. So as you see, they use colors, you know, uppercase, lowercase letters, and this is a poster designed for deaf students. And the other one is a poster designed for students with dysgraphia. So they have difficulty in writing. So as you see, my brilliant students just use different writing styles in this poster just to give that message to the students with dysgraphia, saying that you can write in any way. You are, you know, welcome to write in any way in this classroom. So as you see, these posters can be examples of inclusiveness, and yeah, that can be used in an ELT classroom environment. So yeah, before closing up, I really would love to share these quotes with you. These are really important quotes for me. And the first one is by Brenda Smith Miles, who also has an individual with a disability. And she says that, I failed to learn your language, and I'm described as having a deficit. You fail to learn my language, and I'm described as mysterious and puzzling. And Professor Rita Dunn again says, if the child is not learning the way you are teaching, then you must teach in the way the child learns, right? And finally, Gabriela Arrieta of Bolivia, she is also an individual with disabilities, says that we are not the sources of problems, we are the resources that are needed to solve them. We are not expenses, we are investments. So this is really important. So if we see each student as an asset, you know, students with disabilities as asset in an ELT classroom, then we can really achieve, inclusivity in our ELT classrooms. So as ELT, prospective ELT teachers, and as ELT teachers, so I highly recommend you, when you go to the field, for example, after graduating, I'm talking, for prospective ELT teachers, when you go to the field. So we are always asking, can I help you, right? So be sure that you are asking your students, how can I help? So just guide them, talk about their learning needs. So this will also help you to write your own map, your own teaching map in teaching, English to these students without segregating any of them from each other. So yeah, this is the end of my presentation. Heartfelt thank you for listening, and thank you so much. So if you have any questions and for further inquiry, please contact me on these emails, and you can always, reach me on my LinkedIn account. Yeah. So I think I am 30 seconds early to finish my session. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Çiğdem Hocam, for this elaborate, comprehensive, amazing presentation and all the solutions and ideas you have provided for ensuring inclusivity in our classrooms. So our dear audience, if you have any comments, any questions you'd like to make, please do not hesitate to share them through chat or by lowering and hiring your hand and asking your questions and making your comments. Mücahit Hocam made a comment. I can share my experience with a student who has eyesight disability in prep class of university. What I used to do mostly was to repeat the things I was conducting and make visuals, exam papers larger. He says also he used to share their experiences with each other, with his colleagues. She succeeded. Perfect. And Mr. Hocam say thank you, Hocam. Do you have any comments, any questions, please? Yasemin Hocam, please.
Merhabalar hocalarım. Thank you very much, Çiğdem Hocam, for joining us today. I joined the session a bit late. I'm sorry if I missed the beginning, but I am curious about your research. You talked about the discrepancy between the pre-service teachers and the practicing ELT teachers. So pre-service teachers were more positive towards, inclusive education. Do you think it is because of inexperience, or it is because of these new courses like you taught, at our university? So why do you think there is so much discrepancy? Or is it their, younger learners? I mean, pre-service learners nowadays, they're younger generations. I mean, they're more sensitive perhaps towards these issues. Is that the reason, do you think? Or who are the participants, the pre-service teachers? What is their background? So I'm very optimistic about their responses actually. So that's why I'm very curious about the participants.
Yeah, thank you, Yasemin Hocam. It's really nice to see you here, by the way, and thank you for joining to my session. Yeah, these are students from various public universities studying at ELT department and from various classes. And you are right. So because of their lack of experiences, they are optimistic, I can say. So yeah, and you are definitely right. The teachers, the ELT teachers already teaching in the field have a really difficulty in teaching, not teaching, but they also have to deal with school administrators, parents. There are other components that they have to deal with. But in higher education institutions, prospective ELT teachers only have to deal with the knowledge, right? Knowledge based. They do not have any experience yet, but when they go to the field, they have to you know, collaborate, communicate, and discuss these issues with parents, school administrators, and this can be really challenging for them as well. Not only teaching to these students, but also being, you know, obliged to deal with all this kind of stuff. And you are right. So because to be able to not prevent the enthusiasm that these prospective ELT teachers have, we as policymakers actually, or higher education, you know, board, so we should really take proactive actions to be able to keep this internal motivation that prospective ELT teachers have when they go to the field. So not only, you know, professional development, but also, you know, physical improvement at schools, or proactive, you know, actions in terms of policy making are really necessary in our country. And yeah, I can say that lack of experience can be one of the things that results optimism, yeah, of prospective ELT teachers.
And I have one more question. So you talked about more training is needed, you know, ELT practitioners and, you know, pre-service teachers mentioned that, you know, they need more training, more support. And we have started offering this inclusive education course with the help of you. So thank you very much indeed for offering that course and for all the insights you provide our students with. So do you think it is a good start, and what else can we do in our program or in other teacher education programs? So if you had a chance, you know, if you had a magic wand, what else would you do to support, to give this training?
So yeah, this is the first step with my course. So, and as far as I know, in Turkey, in other, you know, universities, they do not have such course, as far as I know. So they have courses, you know, where they mention about special education, but their focus is not specifically on special education students in ELT classes. As far as I know. And first of all, thank you for this opportunity that you and Nurten Hoca, you know, gave to me so that I can share my knowledge with this, you know, brilliant people studying at METU. And what else we can do? Inclusive education course is not enough. So in other courses, in technology integrated courses, for example, so the instructors should be able to teach how to adapt those, you know, specific teaching practices to specific students coming from specific backgrounds or having specific disabilities. Weekly, for example, we can focus on specific disability and mention about the learning needs of that specific disability and design, you know, materials, activities, classroom activities, just responding to the learning needs of that students with specific disability. This can be a course. So in the first semester, some of my students said that we thought that we are gonna weekly focus on a certain disability and we are gonna arrange, you know, activities for that specific disability. So this is a great suggestion, and this is an expectation. Actually, they also responded to this question in this way. So yeah, and also instructors working at university level, we should also be able to teach about this, you know, disabilities in our classes. We should also talk about specific disabilities in our classes. That's why we should also learn more about, you know, diversity in an ELT classroom, not only from the perspective of socio-cultural, you know, linguistic perspective, but we should really be able to talk about learning needs of a certain disability as instructors, yeah, teaching at the university environments. I hope it helps.
Thank you very much, Hoca.
Yes, Hoca.
Thank you, Yasemin Hocam. Thank you, Çiğdem Hocam. And we have so many comments in the chat that I can't read all of them, but as you can also see, thank you, Hocam, so much for this wonderful session, this wonderful talk. Do we have any further questions? If we don't, I'd like to invite you all to have a whole group screenshot as a memoir. So those who are available, those who would like to, please turn on your cameras so we can have an amazing group photograph, a screenshot together. So let's get ready in 10, 20 seconds, if we can. So if you're ready, I'm taking a screenshot in 3, 2, 1. Wow, what is this reaction? Right, great. It is so nice to see every single one of you here. Thank you, Çiğdem hocam. Thank you all our dear audience. And I'd like to see you in our following sessions too. We wish you an amazing evening. Take care and have an amazing evening, everyone.
Hocam, I actually have a question, very little one. I'm not regularly attending these meetings and I'm
Yes,
new
Fidan.
here. So how can I have these presentation? Like it is very useful for me. I can use it. But how can I find it? Or can you share it with us?
Çiğdem hocam, would you like to make a comment on this? Because only
As
Çiğdem
far as
hocam has access.
PPT hocam or the recorded version of this session?
The PPT would be better for me.
Okay, so you can email me actually if you got my
Okay.
so can you please email me? So yeah,
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
Thank you hocam. So we wish you an amazing evening. See you everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.